Good afternoon. Good afternoon and welcome to today's session of 7 Minutes Arts Advocacy Pitch. I'm Fernando, CEO of Thalian Hall Center for the Performing Arts in Wilmington, North Carolina, and a proud member of the APAP board. Folks sometimes shy away from this type of work, saying, I'm not a lobbyist, or I'm not a promoter, I don't like talking about myself. But you know what we all are? We are storytellers, and damn good ones at that. No one could better tell stories about their work, their collaborations, their favorite residency experiences than artists and the artist managers that work with them. Presenters are proud of their venues, their communities, their partnerships, and other populations that they serve. And we often hear that data tells, but stories sell. And in the halls of government, with funders, and in the media, this isn't just cliche, it's fundamental in terms of the truth of human psychology. Research in neuroscience shows that well-told stories can trigger a release of dopamine and oxytocin in the listener's brain, building an immediate and authentic connection that dry statistics simply cannot replicate. And in a world of just overflowing with policy briefs and cheap sound bites and headlines, a human story is the only thing that consistently rises above the noise. Stories transform abstract policies into tangible, lived realities and build trust and accountability with policymakers. And us as humans, we're hardwired storytellers from ancient times. People are up to 22 times more likely to remember a story than a list of facts, and policymakers frequently report that personal constituent stories are what actually motivates them to champion legislation. So to get a feel for the room, first we'd just like to see who's joining us. So just with a show of hands, what presenters do we have in the room? Okay, great. How about artists? Fabulous. Artist managers? Fabulous, great, welcome. Any vendors, funders, anyone I missed? Okay, cool, well, that gives us a little lay of the land. And also we'd like to just take a pulse from y'all to see, what type of audiences do you want our panelists to focus on? So we can focus on all of them, but if there's a particular area that you want to focus on, just I'm going to ask about public and elected officials, funders, and media. So public and elected officials, what's any folks interested in that audience? All right, how about funders? All right, very good, and then media? Okay, all right, so it looks like funders is number one, and then public elected officials and media kind of at number two. So cool, that gives us a little framing here. So it's now my pleasure to invite our impeccable panelists for their introduction, so take it away.
I am Lucy Sexton. I don't know if this is on yet.
Yep.
Okay, good. First thing I want to say is it's nice that this isn't a huge group. I would really invite folks to come down because I think having this be a conversation is going to be the best use of this. So if you're up for it, come on down. And you can still leave. I know sometimes we won't take it personally. This is a busy conference, and I know you're coming in for 10 minutes here, but you want to catch something else. It's okay. So I won't be offended if you leave. I'd love to have folks be closer in. I'm Lucy Sexton. She, her. I am a lifelong New York City artist, dancer, choreographer. I've had a dance performance group for 40 years. I have directed and dramaturged theater. I have produced documentary films. I say all that because I'm not here in that capacity, but I think it's important to state, and I know when we said, are you artists or are you, artist managers? Like a lot of us are both, right? It's okay, it's good, let's say it. And I think it informs it. So I'm here because I lead New Yorkers for Culture and Arts, which is a cultural advocacy coalition and organization supporting our system and encouraging us to work together to advocate for public funds, public policy, and for systems that support the arts and culture ecosystem.
Great, thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm Gena Buhler. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the National Director and Leader of Cultural Projects for a company called Turner & Townsend Heery. We really spend time helping owners and organizations advocate for themselves, for projects, and for long-term strategic planning. I come to this work from an interesting path of having started my career as a dancer. I was then working for a festival. I was an agent for IMG Artists and the Road Company. And then I spent over 12 years as a venue manager at the Buhler Performing Arts Center in Beaver Creek, Colorado, and then the historic Wheeler Opera House in Aspen, Colorado. And now what I do is I spend my time helping all different types of folks across North America really learn how to advocate and plan for what is coming next and sort of what's in front of that. So really excited to be here today to talk through this all.
Hi, everybody. Glad to be here. My name's Claire Rice. I have two roles that I'm coming at you with today. The Executive Director of Arts Alliance Illinois, which is the creative sector advocacy organization for we do city work in the city of Chicago. We also do statewide work around the states. We're in both city and state government. And then I'm also the co-chair of something called the Creative States Coalition, which is organizations like the Arts Alliance and Culture, remind me.
New Yorkers for Culture
New Yorkers
and
for
Arts.
Culture and Arts.
Most
Thank you,
impossible
Lucy.
name.
Yes, tricky name. But local and state level advocacy organizations that are coming together to learn across the country from one another. So if you're not connected to some kind of advocacy organization within your state or locality, would love to help you with that if that's not already happening in your life. We are resources for all of you. I have many members that are presenters and artists across the state of Illinois, so we can't do the work. We don't advocate for, we say we advocate with and behind, right? So it takes all of you in terms of that advocacy work to really come to the table, and we'll talk about that today.
Great. Well, we'll just jump right into our first question. And as you know, as was stated before, it's a conversation. If there's a point that you want to join in, we have a microphone here up front, or you can project loudly from your seat, but ideally microphone so we can ensure everyone hears. And we'll jump right in. So for the panel and for everyone, how does your pitch change when speaking to a legislator, a funder, a journalist, community member? What stays constant as well, no matter what the audience, who that is?
You want me to start?
Go for it.
Okay. I think the most important thing is to remember to think in advance who you're talking to, right? And it's not just, is it a funder, is it a legislator, but also what are their interests? If it's a legislator, look at what other committees they're on, right? Are they on economic development? Are they on aging? Do they have other interests that you might be able to say, yes, my work intersects with that, and it shows that, you've taken some time and find out what they're working on. The same thing with funders. And, when I said before about us being artists, people in the funding world, they're often coming back and forth from being performers, presenters, working in the funding world. So I think that's one of the most important things is to just say, to think who they are, to talk to them as people rather than as a presentation, and to just know that, engage them, right? They have things that, ask them questions. What can you say? What kind of things are you looking to fund? So remember that it is a conversation, not just a one-way conversation. In terms of the community, and I'm glad you brought up talking to community, it makes me think of what is the ask at the end, right? Am I asking for money? Am I asking for you to just come and see my next work and be engaged and know what is happening in my organization? Or am I asking for you to participate, right? I want the community to support this. I want you to get your kids and us to come into your school and you to come back to us, so that there's different things that you're asking for and that can shape how you approach talking to them.
And I think in any given day in all of your lives, you may be having to have a different message or a different conversation. Maybe one is about a program and another may be about a project. Many of you who have facilities at some point are going to have a renovation or just need new equipment. But at the same time, you're also going to have to be looking at your programs and your audience development and how that's coming in. So I really always recommend that you have your why very centered through all of those types of conversations, and then really start thinking about what's our why. We talk a lot about mission, vision, and values, but a lot of these funders specifically have mission, vision, value thrown at them all the time, just regurgitated. This is our mission. This is what we do. Think about what's your why and why you're coming to the table for that discussion. And then think about how that why is impacting them. Similar to a lot of these points, you're going to do research on the funder side or even on the public official side, right? It's really difficult to go speak to a mayor or a member of city council who you need to support your project if they're not aligned with what you do. They may not be folks who love the arts, but I can tell you they may be people who come and look at city government from economic development lenses. So really thinking about that intersection of the arts and business, the arts and community, and be able to center in your why to say, this is what we're doing and this is how this all benefits, and don't really shy away from figuring that out. It can be a little loose. It can be a little, talking around in a circle to say, we do this, and then this circles into what I know is important to you. And as Lucy was saying, that has to be conversations. You have to be ready to dig into it and say, I also see that you're supporting this. We've aligned with this in this way. Do you think this would, right? All of those things that go there. It's really easy for folks having these conversations to have you come in, do a quick pitch, and then be like, okay, great. That's done. You have to engage them. You have to come in with that passion. And I think thinking about the why and having that be your consistent thread is very helpful.
Yeah, and just to build on what my colleagues have said, I think, an example from my advocacy life was when we met with a Republican congressional representative, Adam Kinzinger, who's been in the news here and there over the past few years, but Republican congressman from Illinois, who really is not an arts person, right? Isn't arts forward. It's not tops on his list of priorities. An interesting guy, a moderate Republican, but not particularly interested in the arts. So when we met with him and his senior staff, there was just this kind of coldness immediately, right? We just didn't have that, like they weren't excited to meet with the arts folks, right? So we really started with an issue that Adam cares about deeply, which is veterans, right? And we were able to talk about what the NEA has done in collaboration with a lot of the veterans programs that they've offered over the over many years. That's really a credit to a lot of those programs in terms of how we've been able to amplify funding for the agency over time, and that making that connection between addressing PTSD, addressing mental health for our servicemen and women. I think that was a click, right, in Kinziger's brain that we needed to make by starting with something that he cared about. And he was like, oh, I've never thought about that. I never realized, the power of this thing to really address some of the needs of something that I'm very, very deeply committed to and interested in. And it just changed the whole nature of the room, the whole tenor of the conversation, us doing the research and the understanding of what this person, this decision maker cared about, and starting with that point and kind of coming to the arts through that lens. And it really transformed the conversation. I'll also just say in terms of how we frame that conversation, whether it's funder, whether it's public sector, decision maker, I love the model that my grad school professor, Marshall Gans, uses for community organizing. Anybody know Marshall Gans's work in the room? Okay. So he was an organizer with Cesar Chavez, and in terms of, union and labor representation, he did a lot of work on the Obama campaigns in terms of community organizing and like door-to-door engagement. And his framework of personal narrative, he uses this self, us, now framework, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like you start with why you're there, and then you find a connective tissue point with the person that you're talking to, the us, and then why this issue, whatever the ask is, like matters to both you and the person and the urgency of the moment. So that self, us, now framework is something I use all the time in advocacy pitches when just to create, again, that sense of connection and community with the target audience, whoever that may be. And we can go deeper into that later.
I could jump in, I just want to,
Please.
one of my favorite detective work things to do before I meet with a public official is to look up, and obviously anyone who gives $50 or more to a candidate has to be reported by the FEC. And so you can look up on the website and you can see who all the contributors are to the campaign. What I like to do is pull that list and then cross-check it with our donors and our ticket buyers. And 9 times out of 10, they're matches. And you'd be shocked, in terms of sometimes who your donors and patrons may contribute to, but also then that's the point where I'll reach out to them and say, hey, I want to reach out to candidate blah, blah, blah. Would you mind coming along with me? Or would you mind giving them a call in advance of my meeting with them? And 10 times out of 10, they'll say absolutely, because they love the venue and they know that they have sway over this, public official in terms of being a contributor to their campaign. And so having that, again, so much of what we do in our work is relationship, and where you can find again those relationships where you're trying to advocate, having that door cracked open can be very helpful.
And I would say that's the same for a funder,
Yeah,
right? If you're going to meet with a certain foundation, like look who that has been funded by them. Talk to them first, right? Find out if you have a board member that has any connections to them. It could be a sideways one, but as you say, most people want to say, oh yeah, I can help with this.
Absolutely,
It's
yeah.
terrific. I would also just add, just because you were talking, do not make presumptions about the political leanings
Absolutely
or
right.
whoever
Yep.
it is that you are
Yep.
going to meet with.
That's right.
Republicans do a good job of funding the arts in many,
100%.
many instances, particularly locally. Progressives, we had a progressive city council. We had to really educate the progressives that this was not a upper class issue. So, remember that. And also I would say that with the funders, that person is not only finding out what the foundation likes to fund and where they're going, and if they've just recently announced new initiatives or whatever it is, or a new focus, but also who that person is. Where did they work before? Where did they come from before that? So that you may know them because, actually, they used to dance in so-and-so's company. Or, and they like to be known, right? Everyone does. We like to be seen as a whole person. So anyway, just that the individual funders, it has surprised me as well. And I say we should do this. I've walked into funding meetings and this person said, Lucy, we know each other because of this, that, and the other. And I was like, oh, yes, of course we do. Yes, fantastic. So anyway, I'll take my own advice on that and do some research.
Well, and just to add to that, Lucy, an illustrative example on the nonpartisan nature of how support for the arts can look is if you correct for inflation, the highest per capita support in this country ever for arts and culture was under the Nixon administration, and the lowest was under the Clinton administration. So it's really not a partisan issue. There's political climate, there's lots of things going on, but it's not. To your point, Lucy, it's not Republicans, no, Democrats, yes, by any stretch of the imagination.
Are there any thoughts or comments or questions about this question before we move on?
Or experiences that you've had.
Yeah.
I just want to echo that. I have a long communications history, and I think that audience analysis piece that you talked about is so key in not only this, but so many conversations. If you can come at a conversation with empathy for where the other person is and what they've been through and what information they have and what information they need to make good decisions, I think that goes a long way in crafting a message.
Yeah.
Can somebody rephrase that? Because I didn't hear that clearly.
Can you say it on the mic?
Yeah, say
Would that be okay?
Oh, say it on the mic. Yeah, we have the mic right there.
Yeah, I was just saying that as a longtime communications person, the idea of audience analysis is so integral to not just this conversation, but really any conversation. If you can step back and just actually have a little empathy for the person that you're communicating with, see where they've been, what information they already have, what information they need, and how you can, that empathy and perspective goes a long way in crafting the message that you want to convey with your outcomes in mind. So I love that piece of audience analysis in anything, and I think it's especially really powerful in a situation like this.
Right.
Hello, hello,
Hi,
hello, hello. Is that
Allison.
working? Are you hearing me back there? I get
Yep.
so, I don't know, maybe it's my ears, but I really have a problem hearing in some of these spaces. I just want to add to this. I don't know if you're familiar with Loretta Ross, Dr. Loretta Ross, professor at Smith College, African-American woman, remarkable history, including winning the top prize in the state of Texas at the age of 13 for academic standards that got her early admission into Vassar, but then she was not accepted in the end at Vassar after they offered a scholarship because she was a single mother. So she's had a lot of varied experience. During COVID, she started an online program called Calling In the Calling Out Culture. And some of you who may have read her article in the New York Times Magazine, this is like 4 or 5 years ago. So she was doing this online program, and it very much what you were saying, Claire, I think, finding that point of connection. And, you know, this is during COVID, and Trump's coming back in, and people are really freaking out. Like, how do we even have this conversation? And I remember the first thing that she was talking about was just find out, you know, where your shared interest is. Like, maybe you both like chocolate ice cream. So really, I always remember that, because I think it can be that kind of simple connection. I mean, I appreciated what you said about the military. I think that really is true. But it might even be something more simple than that. And I think we really need to remember and embrace that. She's no longer doing that online course, sadly, but she does have a newsletter. So, you know, make a note if you're interested. I just found that conversation really valuable, and I urge other people to check it out. Thank you.
I would love to hear any other stories y'all have about, you know, advocacy conversations or hooks that change the nature of the conversation. I think it'd be really helpful to share. I also think that when I was earlier in my career in this advocacy work, I would get really disgruntled by a legislator coming to a meeting and saying, "Oh, you know, arts, my kid does art," you know, or or it's like, you know, it's like, "Oh, that's so nice. Art's just painting, right?" You know, I mean, like, but you got to use that, right? You have to use that starting point. They're making a connection, and my instinct is like, "Oh, you don't know anything about anything," you know. But of course, like they don't live this work like we do, right? They're not in this field, and that is their starting point. So, you know, to all of these points, you have to take that starting point and and it, right? And go deeper with it, and then expand and say, yes, visual arts and music and film and literary, and, you know, and expand that conversation, and then connect it again to those things that they care about. So you got to resist that urge to kind of dismiss that more maybe that initial simple starting point for folks.
Yeah, that's our job. That's
Exactly.
why we're there as advocates.
That's right. That's it.
And to be those educators.
That's it.
And I love, Lucy, what you said about, you know, approaching, especially with legislators, they're human.
Yep.
And I sometimes we forget that, you know, and you know, folks talk about, you know, I'm so nervous to meet with, you know, this elected official. I can assure you, they're just as nervous to meet with you. And I in another life, I worked in the Senate, and I, you know, met with constituents on a regular basis, and we never knew what, you know, the constituents wanted or what they were going to say. And so, you know, and at the end of the day, we work for y'all, the constituents. So
they work for you.
So I would, you know, take that nervousness and throw it out the door, because you as the constituent, as the advocate, you were the one with the power in the room. And so you don't forget that.
Really important. I got a question.
I think I understand what you're saying about us having the power in the room. And what I have is a question, not so much about the advocacy in particular, but it's how you deal with the mentality of people that look at the arts as a luxury. And when we're advocating for the arts in underserved communities, and, you know, for example, this is something that like kind of rubs me the wrong way, but like there's a thing on the internet where Denzel was talking to a group of people, and he said something to the effect of, we're not saving lives, we're not you know, it's a luxury to get to do this work as an actor. And, you know, we're not on the battlefields saving lives. And, you know, I can't recall the exact quote, but it kind of minimizes what we do as artists. And so how do we combat that mentality? Yes, we're not brain surgeons and all of that, but we are saving lives in different ways, because there are people who are thinking about committing suicide that listen to a song or listen to a poem or watch the film, and that changed the trajectory of their lives. So we are saving lives, but how do we let people see that, you know? And I guess that's my...
No, it's great. I think it's, you know, it's turning the conversation around. We're not the brain surgeons, but we're taking the youth and making them think, who will then become the brain surgeons. You know, making those connections, finding where finding the connection again with the audience analysis on how, you know, what their passion is, whether it's education. Well, what are the gaps that, as an artist, that you're filling in that community that the community can't afford to do in the classroom?
I would just say that, first of all, thank you for that question. And this may sound like the opposite of what we've been saying, but before you go in there, have your headlines ready, right? And I would say have your stories ready. So rather than trying to take them, respond to a point they're making, whatever, start to tell a story about, you know, Queens World Film Festival has a story that has always stayed with me, right? Where they did a program in the schools, and this fifth grader got him into making a film, and he had been selectively mute. And he started to engage, and he started to talk, and he wanted to be the presenter when they finally did their final thing. And he talked about what he had been missing by not speaking. And the principal was in tears. She was like, I haven't heard him speak ever. So that's a story, right? That's a life saved. That is a life completely transformed. So just responding by saying, let me tell you a story, and tell a story about something that shows the power of your work, right? And second of all, that doesn't, you know, yes, art is a luxury is one of the things that happens, but also, you know, we hit all sorts of prejudice and racism and things and you just, for me, I can't speak, I'm not a black person, but I'm a cis white lady, but we want to be able to not get derailed by their bullshit, excuse my language. So, you know, that's what I mean, like write down your headlines. And also, when you write down your headlines, when you say like, well, we're about done, that's great, thank you very much, look at your headlines and say, one more thing. I want to make sure you know that we have this upcoming program or whatever it is. So that's my response.
Well, and it's, I think, really easy for us to all in this room get on our soapbox about why art is a part of the human condition, right? Like, we all know that is why we do what we do every single day, or we'd be selling widgets. But it's really easy for us all to go in with that passion and that detail and lose all of the headlines in that conversation. So no matter who you're talking to, and if we're talking about legislators, if you're talking about local government, if you're talking about funders, your donors, new audience members, anything, it comes back to just telling a story, and telling a story that is easy to know and understand, right? Think about during the holidays, I hate having my TV on for many reasons right now, but the ASPCA commercial keeps coming up, right? And you look at it and you're like, oh, I have 2 dogs, but I need to go save 6 puppies now, right? Because it just, you see the faces, you see what that is. Well, on the flip side, what our industry is doing during the holidays is most time you're seeing Nutcracker, you're seeing a big Broadway production coming through. Everything that can be on TV is commercial entertainment. And so a lot of times people are balancing that out during the season of giving. And so it's really hard not to have people be like, oh yeah, art is a luxury, right? We can do these things, and that's, oh, it's so nice that you get to go see a Broadway show. And it's being able to, again, bring in that this is the human condition and this is why. Here's my story. Here's the story about X, Y, and Z. When I was running a venue in Colorado, we did a bus in school program that so many do. And I was walking through the grocery store and this small Hispanic boy runs up to me and just like grabs on my coat while I was in the middle of grocery shopping and says, "Mama, mama, mom," and drags his mom over. His mom barely spoke English, and we had a great, very broken Spanish conversation about the fact that he comes home and talks about what the arts means to him because we bussed him in to see 5 shows in the last 2 years. And he remembered that, and he saw me as the person who gets up and does the Wiggles dance in front of them before the show, right? And he was like, go talk to her. She's important. She's a part of this community. And we had this entire conversation about it. I can go tell funders that. I can go tell our board about that. And they turn around and say, oh, wow, that impacts that kid, not just in that day that he's seeing the show, but at the grocery store, in that connection and bringing it through. Think about those stories and everything we do. It takes us off of our soapbox and into the reality of what that is, in the same way that the darn ASPCA commercial makes you want to cry, right?
And then I'll just add one other potential framing to your, which overlays some of this, is that one of my colleagues at an advocacy organization in California often uses the phrase like, the arts may not be first responders, but the arts are second responders, right? Like they are there after crises immediately with mutual aid, with community connection and cohesion, with, our sector with mental health. Like, we are the ones that come in and actually like help knit communities back together in times of real crisis. So I think that sort of second responders frame has been pretty powerful to kind of counteract some of those nonsense narratives around art is not a luxury.
For those of you who are presenters, right, of maybe abstract dance and things, and so you're going like, well, I didn't make the mute kid talk, right? Just the act of coming together in community and experiencing classical music, experiencing dance, that has been shown to have a measurable effect on mental health, on community strength, et cetera. So don't think you don't have access to those kind of data points because the work you do is more, arty art.
It's all shared experience together, right? It doesn't matter what it is, so.
A trick microphone.
That's true. It's a little Sunday afternoon trick.
I just wanted to say also, and I learned a lot of this from Lucy and all the advocacy from 2020 that we did, but a lot of representatives, it's not just that they think of the arts as luxury, it's a completely different language to them. It's sort of like when I worked in finance, I was an alien to all my finance colleagues because I was an artist, and it's a different language. So we found that in our advocacy work, we had to reframe the arts as economic investment. We'd go to talk to people and they'd say, oh, talk to our Department of Cultural Affairs. And we'd say, no. We're not asking for a grant. We're asking for you to understand the impact that we are having on the entire community when it comes to hotels, when it comes to transportation, when it comes to local street traffic, at retail, at restaurants. It's actually a cornerstone industry. So what we were doing was completely reframing what we do in the language that these people were speaking. And it's not to say that every representative is that way, but I think that it's about understanding what is the language that particular representative is speaking? What do they care about? And how do we frame it in a way in which they can connect with it, as you were saying earlier, right? Which is often about a completely different issue that is not what we would like to say is hearts and flowers and changing lives. That doesn't mean as much to them as sometimes dollars and cents or, mental health or healthcare or education. And those are languages that they speak sometimes. So how can you reframe your argument, your advocacy?
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for that. Please.
Just piggybacking off of that, I make really political theatre, and I'm finding that I'm I'm in a bunch of different settings. So sometimes I'm in a family-friendly setting. Sometimes I'm in a completely adult environment. Sometimes I'm in a bar, in a theater, in a community park. And so I'm feeling like I'm getting a lot of whiplash in order to respond language-wise to these different environments. And I'm successful in reframing my work constantly. And the thing I've been really listening for that I don't quite hear yet is that first question around what doesn't change. And I understand, what I do hear is that there's a sense of like the why, the big deep why doesn't change. One of my mentors used to speak about the big deep why being like a gut punch, like something not intellectual, not mind kind of language, but really visceral and very apparent. And I just haven't heard it yet. So I just wanted to re-ask the question, if that's okay.
Well, and I think the question of what shouldn't change is going to be really dependent on what is the conversation that you're trying to have. So if you have a set of project facts that you're talking about and you're trying to, in different settings, in community meetings, in front of funders and in front of, let's say, your city council, if you're really talking about the same thing, really making sure you're not straying from the facts of what that project is, right? We are doing this because of this, and then being able to mesh it in. People, just like when we're marketing a show, it's all the impressions that it takes to make a decision to do something. Think about it in the same way when you're talking about your project or your work. You need to make sure that there's that consistent bit of fact that never changes, because what I've seen happen is if you change the fact just a little bit, right, then all of a sudden someone says, well, wait a second, I was just here and they said this, and now 2 weeks later they're saying that. What is it? Trust gets eroded. And it may just be a matter of you started to talk about it in a different way because of the audience that was there. But then if you have crossover, you're going to start to have confusion within it. So a lot of the work that I specifically do is surrounding project cost and size of project and when something's going to start. And over the course of time, that may change, right? So you may start with a range that says this project is going to be anywhere from $6 to $9 million. And then 3 weeks later, you're saying this is an $8.5 million project. And then all of a sudden someone's like, wait, what is it? So thinking about that is always important in some of that work, especially when it's going to come back to a financial ask or a vote. Right? Because if all of a sudden it's the facts are changing and then you are asking them for that outcome, like Lucy was saying, what are you asking them to do at the end? Sometimes you're asking them to go out to support, to vote, to do whatever that is. And there may be a gap when that happens. Clarity, I think, comes into that moment of what shouldn't change.
And I think building on Gena's point, I mean, one of the challenges we have, I think, as a sector is there's not always that consistency across our messaging, across our data points, we're not so great at talking to, the for-profit and the nonprofit sides of the field and the individual artists and the institution. Like there's some factions, right? And we're working on that nationally, I think, to try and get our get the research more consistent, so that we have that consistency of messaging. And we also haven't gotten to a place yet where, I think there's sort of a debate going on in the field at the moment about do we need that sort of Got Milk campaign, which can resonate for everyone in every way that's big enough to hold all of us, that doesn't change. And then we have more nuanced messaging underneath that. I think there's some hunger for that and some discussion around what that could be. So I think, your question's really great one. And I'm not sure we as a full sector, are there yet, particularly around messaging, I'll say.
Yeah. Can I ask, because you said you do, what's your name? Carla. You do a lot of shows in different circumstances. Yes. And so it's hard to, and so one way that I approach it is don't talk about what the work is, talk about what the impact is, right? So I make work that entertains and engages communities and makes them think. Sometimes I do it in the public park, sometimes I do it in the hospital, sometimes I do it here, but come up with your end headline of what the impact is.
That really helps. Thank you.
Sure.
You got a microphone right behind you.
Thank you.
I just want to make sure that everyone in this room, particularly if you're a U.S. citizen, knows that the arts, Americans for the Arts put out a report. They do the economic impact of the arts. And the report came out, I think it was the spring of 24, and they said that the arts broadly, so not just tickets, but the restaurants, the parking, the babysitters, the whole 9 yards, actually drives more economic impact in this country than either transportation or agriculture. Which, if you think about that, that's huge. So please use that. The report is on their website, and that's a very valuable piece of information, I think, for people to remember as they're having these kinds of conversations.
And if folks need tools too, so American for the Arts actually has their prosperity calculator that's now free online. So if you're thinking about, this is my current budget, but if we make all of these changes and I grow and I'm going to add in a new X and this is going to financially change my picture, it is so easy to just go online, plug in your details, and you get a bottom line number that says this many additional jobs are created, this many additional direct and indirect impact. Please use it. It is the easiest way to just get that bit of data walking into something without having to wait for the next report to come out, without having to spend money for a consultant to come in. Use it. It's great. It's online. Just literally type in like free prosperity calculator, AEA, and it pops up right there. So
I'll direct y'all to one other set of resources, which is the National Association of State Arts Agencies, NASA. They have creative economy profiles for each state. So at the state level, you can get a sense of, and that's actually both, it's not as extensive as the AFTA work that Allison and Gena are talking about right now, because it doesn't give you the like, my work in my community generates this dollar amount. But what it does do is it's both for-profit and nonprofit. So it's just a really nice big number if you're talking about, you know, the impact of the arts in Massachusetts, you know, Arkansas, Illinois, wherever. So that's you can look up, and they've got a number of great little data points there. So they have a nice, so look, creative economy profiles with the National Association of State Arts Agencies.
Right? Please.
I'm just wondering if you have similar resources for some of these ideas around health and mental health benefits, any like specific articles or studies or places to go to look for those kind of things?
There's a ton, but and I don't mean to say that offhand. There are many studies, but the University of Pennsylvania's Social Impact of the Arts Project, which did that groundbreaking study in 2017, just released an update on that study, and it has really good headlines and really great ones to use, and it's really about the community impact of having cultural assets in that community. And one thing that I really love that they do is they compare peer to peer, right? So comparing a low wealth community with lots of cultural assets and a low wealth community that is lacking in cultural assets. And those kids in that first community are scoring 91% better in their standardized tests in school. It's not a, you know, here, they took this class and it made them do this, but it's saying as a community, it was improving the education outcomes.
And then on the mental health side, there's an organization called Behind the Scenes. So sometimes what we don't talk about a lot is our mental health problems back of house and with production. So BTS has amazing toolkits as well as some interesting data that's there. More times I will be able to have a conversation with the funder about why we are trying to design in light back of house, right? Windows, daylights, something. And I can turn a conversation of, well, that's awfully expensive. Why can't we just do a cinder block dungeon in the back of the house? I can very easily take the data that BTS has and turn it into someone saying, wow, I never thought about the fact that these individuals stay in the darkness on their own. And no wonder they have mental health concerns, right? It's one of the biggest areas of our industry that sometimes goes so unspoken, and BTS does some really great work with that too.
Speaking of advocating for one another and not just industry, there are a lot of people in our industry that don't have.
Just taking Christy out.
There are a lot of people in our industry that don't have a seat at the table because we're not American citizens. And if we sit at this whoever meeting and we advocate for this, we're going to get deported. So I think it is also a moment not just to think of how we justify the existence of the arts to justify our project. There are many people in this conference. We can't do that. If we open our mouth about this, it'll be the end. So maybe some thoughts about how do you stay bold and create political art, even if you're not an American citizen and even if you're at risk of being deported for what you have to say, and how us as a community in APAP, we create an environment where we advocate that we could all do this in the future, hopefully.
Thank you so much for bringing it up, and I'm sorry. And seriously, one thing that I have seen and that I invite us all to step into is organizations that can take risks stepping forward for organizations and artists that can't take risks. So for instance, it's not the immigrant example, but National Queer Theater stepped forward into that ACLU lawsuit challenging the gender ideology restrictions in the NEA grants. And they did it because they had lots of trans organizations in their network that could not step forward, that did not want to say that. So they both did it because of that and are very conscious to, when they are in these kind of conversations, to say there are these amazing trans organizations that really should have been at that table. So it goes both ways, stepping forward to be bold, but also then giving credit to who could not step forward because of the current climate.
Shall we zoom in maybe a little more surgically? I guess we'll just go down the line in just 1 minute. What must an effective advocacy pitch include to capture attention, establish urgency, and motivate action?
We've been talking about stories, but the other thing that I will say is if you can get your some of the folks who benefit from your programs to come in with you to these meetings, that's great. If you can't, get quotes from them. I have seen quotes be used effectively from students, just to go back to your questions, who were in an immigrant arts program, and they didn't have to identify themselves, they didn't have to say anything. We said we had a middle schooler who wrote us at the end of the thing that said, at the end of the program, that said, I was so glad to be able to tell my story, because if we don't tell our own stories, who's going to do that, right? So that quote is great. Similarly, whether it is an artist that you have presented or that you commissioned, get a quote from that artist of what that meant to them and their work and their dancers or whatever. So if you can come in holding some effects, not just that your organization is so great, but hearing from the people who benefit from it. It could be a parent of a teacher that was, a parent of one of the students that was in your programs. I've also seen it be used, you go to the restaurant across the street and just say, can you just talk to me about what you see as a benefit? And they'll say, yeah, it's a huge benefit. Nights you have a show, I'm packed. Nights you don't have a show, I have a few tables. So they're not that hard to get, and I think they're very powerful to use.
And I think let's think about how all of this is being delivered as well. So whether you are standing up at a podium for 2 to 3 minutes with a timer in front of you and a big flashing red light that's going to tell you have to stop talking, or you're in a big boardroom and there's just a panel of funders, you have to come in with confidence, clarity, and a little bit of humor. You have to be able to judge the room and show them that you are a person and that you're not just 7 of the same people who have come before. Also remember, when you're speaking publicly, you are on public record. That means media is going to pick up exactly what you say. That means it is on the record that someone 20 years from now can search back for. So really think about what you are saying. And if you don't have the answer, especially when you're doing this publicly, don't make it up, right? It is not bad to say, you know what? That is a very interesting piece of that. I'm going to go back and come back to you with more information. Because the minute you say the wrong thing, going back to what can't change, your narrative changes, the fact changes, and you will forever always be trying to make that up. So I think about that in the delivery and the fact finding, but then just don't be dry. Don't speak softly, right? You have to find a moment to have people have confidence in you and what you are saying, because then they have confidence in what you are advocating for in the story you're telling.
Yeah, I would just add, when the self-us now that I talked about earlier, that's my go-to for these pitch constructions. And then like anything else, I want us to get to the point where we're the field where everyone else is coming to them, or coming to us rather, for advocacy training, right? Because we're to Shane's point at the beginning, we're the storytellers. We have these skills right within our field. And how many times, I always ask artists, like, how many times are you out there as an activist for every other issue but yourself, right? Like you're doing all this activism around the environment, around, social justice, around, but like, what about your life and your livelihood, right? I think it's like we have all these incredible activists within our field, and they're not advocating for themselves. So all that to say, I think we need to practice, like we practice our performances, right? You have to practice your pitch, you have to practice your messaging, you do it, like sort of get to a point where it's just rolls off the tongue, like a mission statement, especially if you have, I've been in situations where I'm walking with a legislator where they're between one room and another room, and I have like 60 seconds to just get it out, between there and there. So I think you've just got to be able to get to that concision, and doing that takes a lot of practice.
I realize that one of the things people asked about was talking to press and media. And I just want to say, in terms of that, it's similar to what I said about headlines, but go in knowing what you want to say first, and don't answer the question that they ask, right? You're going in to talk about the trouble that theaters are having economically right now, right? And you want to talk about the fact that, public funding has dried up and private funding has dried up, and, et cetera. That's what you want to talk about. And they ask, why do you think some theaters are doing better? Because they seem to be able to solve it, and yet your theater isn't doing better. Why is that? So there's public funding, there's private funding. Like just talk about what you wanted to talk about, and say that. You'll see politicians and media people do it all the time. Regardless of what the question is, make the first thing you say what you wanted to say, the message that you want to see in the paper.
Can y'all give some examples, or kind of a best case example where you've used data to reinforce a story of impact?
Yeah, I can start. I mean, I think I'll start by sort of saying that Dick Durbin, senator from Illinois, when he was doing the introduction one day for Americans for the Arts, did a Capitol Day, like on the Hill for a while, and we would all go down and meet with folks for this Arts Action Day, and he said, yeah, leave the economic impact study on the table and tell me a story. So he's like, I don't care about that. That's not what's going to change my mind about anything. It's, my staff will read it, fine. You have to have it, but the story piece is of the utmost importance. And I mean, you can think of data as mass-produced stories, right? I mean, the data does tell a story if it's done in a compelling way as well. So, I mean, we've been trying to think more expansively about economic impact studies. So, yes, we need to talk about jobs. We need to talk about, total dollars that are generated by the work. That's all true. But to some of the points we've all been making, like, that's not the only thing that this work does, right? So, there's, I think, going back to the arts and health points, the national organization, it's a national NOAA, National Organization on Arts and Health, has some really great resources, and researchers Jill Sankey and Tara Golden both look up their work, really great, compelling data points that you can use in case making around arts and health. But I think, again, it's going to depend on who the person is, what the story is that you're trying to tell, but the data needs to amplify that story. And again, you should be coming to organizations like mine. If they're not giving you the data you need to do that case making, they should be. So, you need to ask for what you need from them. And if there are legislators asking you questions that you can't answer, that comes back to infrastructure that you don't have to build. That APAP, that your advocacy orgs, AFTA, these organizations should be helping to supplement getting you those answers if they're not already.
And sometimes what you can get into as well is a situation where you're like, wow, my dad is not sexy right now, right? How do I talk about a roof leak and frayed carpet in a way that gets anyone excited about anything? So there also sometimes is this idea of asking the question, can you actually show and not just tell as it comes down to the story behind that data? We're working on a project in Southwest Georgia, a small town called Thomasville. There's a municipal auditorium built in the early 40s, and it is in just disrepair. The city has just ignored it for years and years and years. And there is this presenter there that has dreams and aspirations of being able to do things on stage, but she has a building that does not have a fire suppression system. It seats 1,200 people, and there is no fire alarm even in the building. There are no fire extinguishers, let alone the mold and the trip hazards, and no emergency lighting or aisle lighting, right? You don't want to walk in the building. But she's had all of these studies and reports that say you should do something to fix your building, and here's millions of dollars for how to do it. And she just couldn't get anything done, couldn't get it done. Her city council didn't care. They wouldn't allocate budget to it. And she kept saying, I have all these shows I want to book, but I can't do it. So we took this approach to say, okay, let's stop literally telling them what their problem is and what their data is. Let's walk them through this. Let's tell them the stories of how this is impacting them. And we took the 5 members of city council on an 1.5 hour long tour with flashlights and hard hats and masks, and took them through the areas. And we didn't just say, ew, gross, look at that. Oh, don't step there. We brought the connection together that said, if you have someone who is trying to come in and they use a wheelchair, they cannot come here. If you have this, this is happening here because. As you're showing them, this is this and this is that. So it went from something that was in front of them every single year for over 10 years of you've got a problem, you got a problem, to them sitting there, and the mayor literally said out loud, I am never walking back into this building again. Well, his city council chambers are also there, so twice a month he's required to walk back into the building. And he all of a sudden took that in, and they all started thinking about, wait, we're asking our community to come here, and we're not giving them a simple, basic piece of life safety. And it went from a matter of seeing it on paper and it just not translating to be able to see it. And not that we made carpet and lack of elevator sexy, but you're telling the stories and they're there in space. They turned around within 6 weeks and appropriated $6.6 million into the 2026 budget. And we're moving forward now to get that set to get the building reopened. And this is something that if we hadn't taken that approach, I think it would have been another year, another budget cycle, deferred maintenance, and the building just would have stayed closed. So also think about that too. Be creative with how you can do that and how you can still try to keep it positive. I think that was the thing that we coached everyone going into. I was like, we cannot make this seem like this is the end of days here. We have to be able to have positivity in the end to say we can do this because, but also please see where all your exits are and how quickly you can get out of here during the Nutcracker tomorrow because they're using flashbangs on stage, right? It's that sort of piece of it where you're aligning the reality with the storytelling, but sometimes showing them with all the data behind it, because just like you were saying, they're asking you for the data after, have the follow-up, have that information, but be able to tie the data into a little bit more of a story as well.
Yeah, you never know. Some people like the story and some people like the data. It's always good to have both. Yes, I always think lead with the story and then back it up with the data. And I mean, if there's a million examples, but I work a lot with justice arts groups, and one of them, called Ritual for Return, is run by Alex Anderson. And Alex Anderson I've sat next to when he testified at City Council, and he talked about his own history, 16 years in and out of prison, and then experiencing the Ritual for Return program of reentry. After that, going to social work school, becoming the leader of that program. He is now leading that program. The participants in that program have a 90% less recidivism rate than those who do not participate than the general population. And what he ended with is, and we just lost our funding for that program, so I'm going to have to really retract how much it is. And believe me, they were throwing money at him. It was like, how much do you get? How can we step in? What is the number? And also that, right? Have your number ready, right? Okay, I can see this is a good program. What does it cost? And so often the cost is so, you're putting in this much, you're putting in $50,000 and look at the impact you're having, right? If you're reducing recidivism by 90% for the 600 people who came for the program, that's a lot of money you're saving, right? Not to mention people's lives that you're saving. So, yeah. I think have it all in there, but also have your numbers, because they will ask if they are buying your story. It's like, okay, well, how much will this cost? What do you need?
Any success stories of creatively weaving data into stories from the house? If anyone wants to share, or any questions? Oh, yes.
Alex Anderson and Ritual for Return have a show coming up at New York Theater Workshop, so if you want to check it out, they're amazing shows of people who've gone through the program. Sorry, I didn't mean to stop you.
Just really practical questions. I'm curious to hear how you go about finding these stories, staying alert to the stories that show impact.
Write them down. We all hear them, and seriously, you think I'll remember that, and you don't. So I really have to, because I work with a lot of different organizations. When I hear somebody tell a story, that one from Queen's World, she was just telling it off the cuff in a call. I was like, writing it down, because it's a great story. So and collect them along the way, right, in your own work. When an audience member comes up to you afterwards and said, that show broke my heart. That show made me really think about, my cousin who died of cancer, and this is what, whatever it is, write it down.
In our historic buildings, we always talk about how we're collecting the piece of history of which you're managing within. I think as organizations today, we could also do that as well. So just even if you're not a historic entity or a venue or a legacy organization, if you are a brand new artist or you have started something new, think about how are you archiving and documenting your story and your history so that you can very easily be like, oh, we did that thing and it did this and it did that. Where do I find it, right? Whether you're using AI tools, however that comes into how you as your organization or as your company do that, think about figuring out how you're archiving your story so that it's easy to find along the way, because some of us have amazing memories and others don't. We hear all of this through networking, and then it's like, oh, what was that? So figure out those pieces, but then again, keep networking, keep asking people their stories, because it's really easy. You don't just have to tell your story, right? You can sit there and say, this is interesting because our industry is doing this. And as our industry is doing this, this means we're doing this locally. Take the national industry and then localize to you, and don't be afraid to tell those other stories as well.
Yeah, because I think, especially when you're talking about public elected officials, right, the most important voice is going to be their voter. So that voter may not have all the different stories and experiences that, your elected official, you might need to draw on some of those other pieces. It's really important for us to try and get constituents telling these stories, because they don't care if you're not voting for them. So that mapping of geography is also really, really important. It's fine to meet with elected officials for whom you do not vote, but it's less powerful than if you meet with someone who you vote for.
And I don't know if you were saying about collecting stories, like where do you get them? And it's worth doing too, like, audience survey, or when you finish the class, ask the kids to write down, one thing they learned or whatever. So, maybe make part of the practice. I can't stand to do one more survey of what I thought about buying toilet paper in your store, but if there's a way to do it that doesn't feel, like another burdensome thing, it is worth collecting those stories.
Yeah, no, I was just curious in general about, of course, surveys, interviews, but what people have found.
Yeah.
One thing that we have done, I want to jump in with, we sometimes with the holidays at the venue is we have a tree where people write down their favorite story about the venue, and they put it up, they hang it up. And we've discovered some incredible stories, and it's amazing what people are willing to share. And then it's nice too, because then people are reading other people's stories, but then we're able to collect that, and we've we've done profiles on people and all different things.
Nice.
So there's some really soft, fun ways you can do that well.
I actually saw it. Someone, I don't remember. I'm not going to credit to the venue because I don't remember where I was. But just like when you're at a restaurant or a coffee shop and there's a QR code that says, "How did you feel about our F&B experience?" And normally you're like, "Horrible," right? They actually were doing this in their venue after the show, and it was just a really quick prompt. You went to a QR code and it said, "Tell us about your experience," but it basically said, "Tell us your story." Was what it was. And all they were doing was collecting data from people who were there being like, "Wow, I love this tonight," or "I didn't." And it was at the bar, at a little coffee shop, and it was just there. So thinking about what we do with our audiences after the shows. So many times on the venue side, because we're worried about labor and the changeover, we're pushing them out of the venue so quickly. Thinking about how can we actually transition them into a space where they can not only give the feedback, but how can they gather together in the end? And then how can you capture that piece that's happening without having it be a labor cost? QR codes, quick fill out forms. Somebody else was also doing it on the Wi-Fi. When you went to join their venue Wi-Fi and you had to say, "Here's your email address," they had figured out how their Wi-Fi provider also put a quick little like comment section on there. Even if 1 in 200 people are going to fill that out, you're going to start to get those things as well organically, how people want to share.
And I think to this point, sorry, Shane, we have not built advocacy into the DNA of our work in this field, right? When I was in presenting, I had no idea what Americans for the Arts was. I was not doing advocacy work. Like, I was not doing this work in my origin story, which I forgot to tell you is it was in APAP, when I came up through UMS in Ann Arbor. I mean, that was not part of what we did as a practice, right? And so I do think part of that, like involving all of you in consistent building relationships with your elected officials. Of course, you're building relationships with your funders, but on that, I want more people I want this whole room next time to raise their hand when we say who wants to talk about public policy and talking to your elected officials. Like those we have to keep holding government accountable, folks, for this work. We cannot give up on government. Okay. And so like that. So I just want to say that, involving audiences in that too is part of it. So it's not only you building those relationships with your elected officials as leaders in these organizations and artists, but your audiences, your communities. Like there can be asks at the end of performances. There can be, hey, click on this QR code to send a note to your elected official about public funding for the arts. We can build this advocacy work into the fabric of our work in an entirely different way than we have up to this point.
And invite them.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Exactly.
Invite them all year long,
yes,
whether they come or not.
100%.
I'm Ann Daniels. I'm with the Kronos Quartet, and I have a couple questions for you. So we're based in San Francisco. I'm new. My predecessor was with the ensemble for 43 years, and so the changeover is drastic. We have a new lineup, so they're new. And also the Grant for the Arts in San Francisco is seeing change as well. So they're combining with the arts and film, and it's doing all these things. So my question to you is how to tell these stories in times of change. And then another question for you is, we've talked a lot about physical space and audiences, but as the nomadic quartet that we are, we don't have really a physical space that people are coming to. Samantha Pollock, I got to meet her, and the Washington Performing Arts, City of Ours is our stage idea, being able to integrate into the community without having a physical space. Could you speak to those two questions, please? Thank you so much for all of this. It's really helpful.
I'm making sure I understand. I understand the first question, times of change and stories. But the second one was if you don't have a physical space.
When I don't have a physical space to, make these connections with our audience. Mm-hmm. We're kind of being presented, and then we go to the next city, or when we're in San Francisco, we've presented ourselves previously, and we do have some lists and data around those audiences, but the other, 50% of the time it's, in partnership with the presenter. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm thinking first and foremost, tell me your name again, sorry, first name. And it's such a good question. I'm thinking, and others maybe have better answers and smarter answers than mine, but what's making me think both of the change and the impact story is the longevity of the quartet, right? And the lives that it has impacted and will continue to impact along the way, right? What did Kronos do from the beginning? It transformed how we thought about classical music, right? It made it sexy and interesting to young people. And now there's another generation of you coming in, and it needs to continue this work. In terms of gathering those stories, I just wonder if you can get access to, some of those audience, or have an audience talk back and just simply record it when people start to talk about the impact of it or their history. I would think Accent, because it's such a legendary quartet, their history with the, when they first heard it and how they've come back, and these kind of stories would be something for me. Sorry.
Yeah, and I would say absolutely. I think it also depends like what the needs are, right? I would also try and connect with Californians for the Arts, with Arts for a Better Bay Area, both your local advocacy entities and your statewide advocacy entities, to try and tap into bigger policy agenda, bigger asks, and see how the needs of the quartet in this moment align with those asks. And because the nice thing about, developing independent relationships with your legislators is you both can support those local and statewide asks that are coming from these larger organizations that are running advocacy, but then you get to have your own personal, it's like, and we'd love some, if you just have pocket change for Gen Op support for Kronos, great, are there grant opportunities that we should be taking advantage of? Are there connections you could make for us? Legislator X, I think there's this sort of benefit of developing these relationships that can benefit the collective whole of the Bay Area and of California, but then also Kronos specifically.
And then I think let's think about it from the perspective of the road, right? You have 26 cities that you're going to visit in X amount of months, right? A lot of your local venues have their relationship with their donors. They're very protective about their data, right? But really, if you lean into what Broadway has been doing, if you look at what commercial, music has been doing, thinking about that, where are we finding, it's not that I'm saying Kronos needs to have a fan list out there that they're going to get, right? You have a very different audience, but thinking about how can you be asking to share data with the presenters? How can you be asking for this to be a part of the contractual obligation? Mm-hmm. I need to know this level of detail of who is in my audience. I don't need their contact information, right? That's going to be a battle that you will fight until you die if you ask the presenters in the room, right, for contact information of the ticket buyers. But there's other information that's there. What are the basic demographics? What's coming from the ticketing system? I had an artist that basically asked for, we had presented them for about 5 years in a row, and they said, hey, can you help us look at the trends of who our audience is when we come to your venue? And we were looking at it to say, we're trying to develop the audience, and together with the presenter and the audience, the artist, we were trying to have goals of growing them into doing more shows, into doing it more frequently. So there were these conversations and these relationships that come with being on the road that can come into that as well to try to get the data. And then I think a lot of times too, the individual performers are great. The comedians are so good at this. They come into the community and they know the people in the community. I have artists who I will walk through the community in Colorado with, and people will be like, Alex, Alex, Alex. And you're like, wow, you've been here for 9 years in a row in different setups, and this audience now knows you because you're investing time in the community. You're not just coming in and going out. So if figuring out what the support level is in some of those communities becomes important for the change of what Kronos is doing or any other piece of it, think about how are you treating the road? How are you not just in and out as quickly as possible? How does your financial nut for the week tie into staying for education and outreach opportunities, doing your own donor events? Sorry, presenters in the room, right? Like, what is that? How can you actually be building this in the same way that it is happening in other parts of our industry? Think about that. And then to the change piece of it, which I know we haven't spoken too much, I think it's always finding the positive in the change, right? You may know the negative, the nitty gritty, all of the stuff. That is for the bar with a glass of wine and your friend, right? Thinking about what's the positive, why is this change happening? What is this going to do for the organization? How is this benefiting everything that's going? And again, going back to what you practice, practice saying it, because you sit in the nitty gritty of it, and sometimes change doesn't feel good, probably on your end, but being able to just put on that shining face to say, this is why this is so great. And just, again, having that pitch again and again and again as that comes down, it's going to help with that behavioral change management as well. Because if people see the potential negative, they're going to go to that. That's what we do as humans. So if you can spin the positive and get that going there, even if you have to say it in the mirror 6 times to yourself before you go into the conversation, that helps to build that as well.
One little thing in terms of feedback, which actually we're beta testing a new program. I believe they're based in California. It's called Tour Scout, and actually it kind of a double whammy. It's great for the presenters, great for the artist, but it's a system where we encourage audience to review the performance that they came to, and so we've been averaging around 10 to 20. Not huge, but it's actually pretty good. And they're actually beefy reviews that people will write about their experience, and they'll send it in. We share it with it gets shared with the artist and with the venue simultaneously, but also why it's good for the venue. Obviously the story's great, but then it also has been capturing ghost patrons who, obviously someone buys 4 tickets. We only know one of the 4 people in the room. And so it's been great in terms of capturing stories from folks, and you're able to interact with them through the application as well, which is great. So if you wanted to ask further questions, they really had a compelling story, a compelling question, you're able to have that dialogue. But it's called Tour Scout. So anyway,
Just one thing about media. It's a shit show, the media landscape at the moment, right? And like who is what matters and who gets reviewed and do reviews, all of it. But what there is a surfeit of bloggers and people starting a podcast and people who have other work, but they're doing reviews online. Court them, amplify their work, make them your friend. You will get stories from them, and you will also, it's press. You can use it as press, but we have to be responsible, I think, for amplifying that press, right? It's very hard to be a writer about classical music, about dance right now, but if we are amplifying that work, then we are trying to create our own media ecosystem.
as we move into our final, go ahead, please.
I have a question about working with state representatives and local representatives. So one of the things I was shocked about when I started doing advocacy, because I thought I knew how the government worked, and then I got into it and I was like, oh, I don't just elect people and then they make things happen. Advocates are actually the ones that are making things happen. So my question is, what if you do get that meeting and you do have that conversation, what should you expect in terms of next steps from your elected officials?
I think this is going to lead
This
into the
leads
thing. So
perfectly,
go ahead. Yeah.
thank you. Yes. What makes a clear, compelling ask, and how do you ensure your pitch ends with a next step that someone can actually say yes to? Thank you.
Yeah, and I first would say, as I said before, there has to be before.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have been asking, communicating with them about your work so that when you come in, and having clear asks, et cetera. And I'm not going to answer this question. I'm just going to say, number one, I do a lot of advocacy where I get a group of people to come in, right? So a group of organizations come in and everybody lifts up different things. And then we are all making a single ask for this amount of money to be added to the cultural budget in this year's budget. And so, that's a government thing, not so much a funder thing, although I'm very, very interested and see a growing trend of group funder briefings, getting together with a group of, whether it's all about residency programs or art service organizations or arts justice organizations, and presenting 4 or 5 organizations to a bunch of funders too, I also think is useful, but it's not the answering the question, so I'll be quiet.
Make sure before you're going into those meetings, you are sort of identifying in a couple of different buckets what type of meeting it is, right? There's a lot of meetings that you need to go in that are just informational. I'm going to I'm going to start to dangle the carrot for you, but I know I'm not asking you to do anything except for have this meeting so that you can be informed. Then there is an action that you're asking them to take. Is that action coming quickly? Is that action something that is a part of their further process? And then another piece of it is it can be I need you to do this for me, right? You may not actually be asking for someone to take a vote or take an action. You may need them to make a connection for you and for them to advocate on behalf of you as well. So know which of those, in essence, buckets that's going into. And on the government side, it can be really confusing. Who does what level, who talks, how does this happen? Get to know the procedure within your local governments. When do the budget conversations start to happen? On a local level, you as a citizen may see them start talking about budgets in October, but that staff has started to talk about budgets in May or June, right? Know and understand what that budget cycle means for other decision making. I do a lot of work for the city of Denver and Denver Arts and Venues. We looked at it to say, we have a window of 6 months where we can get this project done in front of council, go through the public hearings and get it approved. And we need to get it approved at least 2 meetings before they start into budget, because nothing ever happens on time in government, right? So really think about that. Know and understand the process so that you're not trying to get something in at the wrong time. The city secretaries, the clerks, there's a different level of sort of the administrative office within city government. Get to know them. Get to know your assistant city manager, whoever is the person who's going to run it through. They've had to learn this because they've chosen to do this, just like we're choosing to do the arts. Sit and have a conversation with them to say, hey, I just want to understand what's in front of this. Is this a 3-week process? Is this a 3-year process? And then map that out with what you're trying to do. Because if you go make an ask that is unreasonable in timing or in dollars, then you have to start all over again when it is the right time. And every single government, because this is the way we do it, has a different policy, procedure, and we call things all different things. So really get to know what that is, especially on the local level, so that you can be informed and then you know what you can ask and what you can expect out of that. Because sometimes you can expect out of that, gotta wait till next year. And we never want to be in that position, but you also don't want to go make an ask before you have the information that they need to. So it's sort of balancing that out in some of the background.
Yeah, and I would say, use your resources, right? Like these entities. So most states have an organization like mine that you can go to and say, hey, what's on the agenda for this year? What are you working on for the collective good? I know you're trying to get us money. What else are you working on? What are the other policy plays that you're trying to move this legislative session? I think it's really important also to do that so that ideally whatever you're asking for your organization isn't in conflict with those collective asks. We get a lot of that where folks are kind of going out on their own and asking for line items. It's going to happen. It's okay. But coordinating that is ideal so that you at least know what the collective asks are. And then on the local level, there are not many organizations like Lucy's around the country. There are handfuls of those. So on the local front, to Gena's point, you can also usually connect with some kind of local arts agency who knows a lot of that stuff on the inside. Even if they're not a government agency, they'll usually have a relationship with government and help you kind of navigate that local calendar for budget process and for government process. And then I'd also just say, I want to encourage us as a field to keep thinking about asks outside of the cultural agencies. Like the cultural agency is really important, and we do need to keep pushing for money for the NEA, money for the state arts agencies, and money for our local arts agencies. And we all know the rest of government is always going to have a lot more money in it than any of those parts of our government, right? At least in our lifetime. Hopefully, generations from now, that will be different. But, while we're pushing for that, we also need to keep leveraging, especially in this time and in this moment, other dollars, other opportunities. So, be expansive about your thinking when you're thinking about what those asks could be. Could it be through tourism? Could it be through housing? Could it be through, transportation? Yeah, health, aging. Like what are the channels? And talk to your politicians about what might be possible in other areas of the budget, not just, direct grants for artists and cultural organizations.
And I'll add in real quick, if you are a resident organization or a resident artist in a facility, talk to the other resident tenants. Sometimes I know that's not the instinct, but 9 times out of 10, what you need is also what they need. And so if there's a way that you can come together to make those asks, at a client in Minnesota who 2 of them were asking for the same thing from the city and they weren't talking to each other. And they worked in parallel for, I kid you not, 9 months until the Parks Department finally said, are you guys talking to each other? Because you're talking about doing the same exact thing, just with different controls. You live and exist in this building together with each other all the time, right? Networking, talking about what that is, doing your due diligence or finding an organization to help you with that due diligence is really important because, again, going back to the point of not wasting time in process, all of a sudden, that City Parks and Rec Department said, why don't you guys get together, figure this out, and come back to us next cycle. Next cycle was 1.5 years from then, right? So thinking about that piece too.
I know we're headed towards the end. I just want to get in one thing now that I have thought about the question, which is the ask. You don't want to end any meeting with anyone without there being something else happening, right? And that could be something you want them to send to you. You mentioned this study that you've done. Can you send that to me? That would be great. You know, I have something that I could follow up with you, or I have an event coming up. I'm going to follow up with you about that. One of the great questions, which I have learned doing advocacy with elected officials, every time the last question should be, how can we help you? How can we help you? What do you need from us in advocating? Do you need another sponsor for that bill? How can we support that? And the same thing goes for funders, right? Okay, it's a no, because I don't have the $30,000 for you this year. That's not going to happen. Great. When do you suggest coming back? When do you think, is there another cycle of things? Should we be applying to a different program within your foundation? You know, what can you advise us in terms of going forward? So ask them for help, offer them your help.
And I'll just add in real quick, think meaningfully about if you are having a leave behind. Don't just bring a stack of every brochure that you've had for the past 16 years and a sweatshirt with you to leave there. Because it's just, it's wasteful for them, and they also are like, now what do I do? Like, I've had people bring me like beautiful books, and I'm like, what am I supposed to do with this now, right? And if you're on the public side of it, sometimes you have to then take it and document it and figure out value, right? Think about what they have to do when you're giving things. Think about if a leave behind can be perceived as a gift. Every single state has a different level of gifting that is acceptable for employees to receive. Some states are as low as $15. So even if you leave them something that is beautiful, but that you sell for merchandise for $25, you've now put them in a pinch where they have to do something about it. So really, leave behinds are good if they're meaningful, but also think about what that potentially is, because you want to stay on the positive and not on the, oh God, now what do I do side, right? So.
All right, as we reach our last few minutes, are there any final words, any final questions? I'm just going to open it up to the room.
I have a quick question. Just if I could, you mentioned working with groups that advocate. I'm in a rural community at a venue, and I noticed that like a lot of political division in our country is partially because people in rural communities don't experience the good things that government can do because they're not doing them there, and one of those things is the arts. And I just wonder if there's anything that the State Arts Council, which is the only entity that we really work with in that regard, doesn't do that you think we should be doing, and just your thoughts on like a coalition of rural arts entities in a state, if you're familiar with any states that have something like that, and whether it's working.
I work, trying to embark on work across New York State, and it is hardest with the rural communities, but and it's not always there, people have access to internet, to broadband, having regular Zoom meetings, and if it's, there's 10 people that are in an area that doesn't get it, if they can come to one place and have their, they're all on the OWL, and then you can work with others, it really is good to talk to each other. And of course, the more spread out you are, the harder it is. But on the other hand, sometimes the rural communities, yeah, I know everybody in this town, that kind of thing. But the other thing I would say is that the larger cities and the state advocacy, we need you, right? That's where these things, the coalition gets stronger, right? Because, we're New York City, it's going to be not all, but mostly blue representation. We need to be able to say, this has impact in you, the red district, in this rural area. So understanding that we need, the people who are getting maybe more of the money need you, and making them understand that you need them to advocate for you and to get the whole pot increased especially for the rural areas. Rural areas and low-wealth urban areas are the most dependent on public funding, so we all need to become a bat for each other.
And I'll say most states, it depends on where you are, but are either the state arts agency and or the state arts advocacy entity are convening local arts agencies across the state, covering rural areas to try and align around. So that connective tissue work is happening at the kind of state agency to local arts agency level, or state advocacy entity to local arts agency level. And if it's not, we can talk about that maybe offline.
Well, we are at time. I know our panelists needs to catch a plane, but I just want to thank you so much for being here, and I want to thank our exceptional panel.
Thank you, Shane.
Thank you for being here, and our contact information is in the app, so feel free to reach out if there are any questions that follow up.
Email anytime.
Email.
Yeah, definitely.
So, thank you.